If we understand that God is a storyteller, that the universe is His story, and as image bearers of God, we're all reflecting His story in some manner, way, shape, or form, then the question is, are our stories a tribute to that Creator, or a proxy, a substitution, something to be had instead of the one true story? That's how entertainment gets redefined. When you realize you're looking at mirrors, you're not entertained by the reflections, you're entertained by understanding that they're reflecting something true. Even if they're dirty or distorted like a clown mirror, you understand in part that they're reflecting something that's real. So how distorted is it before it goes from being a tribute, an homage, to a proxy, a substitute, something to be had instead of, or in rejection of the one true Creator and His story? That's the real question. If we're truly going to engage narrative for the glory of God, we have to understand how obvious sometimes these reflections can be, and maybe strip away some of our pride and our hubris in our own storytelling. Take a movie like Tron, for instance. In the first film, a man incarnates into the world of computers. He's a user come to set things right. In fact, he throws himself into the beam and sacrifices himself and then ascends in a beam of light and brings life to the world. In Tron Legacy, the sequel that came out 30 years later, a son is sent into the world to seek and save the lost. And in fact, we understand that the creator, Flynn, has made someone in his image and likeness who has rebelled against him. It's not too far from the Christian story. It's Tron 3:16. It's a mimicry of a classic tale of Savior and sacrifice that's embedded in our DNA. The question is, where did it come from? 20th century writer Joseph Campbell coined the term monomyth to allude to this story that man does ultimately have one shared story that we're pulling all of our stories out of. It's like when Elmer Fudd doesn't recognize Bugs Bunny just because he's wearing a dress. There's a shared source from which all our storytelling springs. And the question really is then, is this monomyth man-sourced or God-sourced, sourced by something beyond us from our Creator? Is it simply something we share psychologically as created organisms by circumstance and chance? Or is it truly something that's attached, that's fixed to an origin that isn't just random, but planned? Even if our storytelling expressions, our outpourings, our offerings could all be traced back to a singular human source, an atheist like Bertrand Russell would rightly contend that that still implies nothing about ultimate meaning or destiny or truth. He'd say, man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collisions of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Author John Frame, professor of systematic theology and apologetics, would offer a counter viewpoint, though, in his book, Apologetics to the Glory of God. The world was made according to a rational plan that can be understood by rational minds. Friendship and love are not just profound human experiences, but fundamental ingredients of the whole world order. There is someone who wants there to be friendship, who wants there to be love. Beauty, too, does not just happen for a while. It's an art of a great craftsman. The world is an artistic creation of the greatest mind imaginable, with a dazzling beauty and a fascinating logic, a history with a drama, a human interest story, a profound subtlety and elusiveness, more illuminating than the greatest novelist could ever produce. That divine history would have a moral grandeur that would turn all the world's evil to good. Most amazingly, the world would be under the control of a being somehow wonderfully akin to ourselves. What incredible experiences might he have in store for all of us? One of my friends is an atheist, and yet one of his favorite passions is Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's a world that narratively he dives into, swims in, lives every moment of his leisure life in. Steeps himself in it because he loves the narrative so much, and yet his belief is firmly set in an atheist view, while this part of him yearns for a world in which there is destiny, the overthrow of evil, there is true hope, there is even hope of afterlife, as Gandalf explains. That's why I find myself heartbroken, because he's fixed his mind firmly in Bertrand Russell's view, and yet it's so obvious from his passion for things like The Lord of the Rings that his heart yearns for the universe of Jonathan Frame. The reason this is so important is that telling stories won't save the world. Reflecting something that's true and can is what we're called to do. I remember at the 78th Academy Awards, John Stewart actually was looked down upon for one of his comments after they had a montage to all of the Hollywood films that had dealt with the big issues, social, political. He said,
"And none of those issues were ever a problem again."
You need to understand this. Hollywood isn't out of ideas. It never had any. You look at some of the original films, they were adaptations of books. Even the new stories, if you look close enough, are just reinterpretations of classics that can go back to Shakespeare or even further. And it doesn't really take a genius to look at a movie like Barbed Wire and realize that it's just Casablanca with a few added endowments. This was the hubris the Athenians had back in the Apostle Paul's day when he walked into Athens in Acts 17. It said that they loved hearing nothing but the newest ideas. They loved hearing from foreigners. They loved all this newness, titillating their senses. But what he did was he told them a story that sounded fresh, but actually proclaimed the Ancient of Days. It wasn't something new, but it was fresh truth to their ears. The classic narrative of our Creator given a freshness in time and context so that hearers will pay attention and see not just the story on the surface, but the reflection that it's pointing to. The band Switchfoot has some great songs, and in one of them they say, if we're adding to the noise, turn off this song. And we have to ask ourselves that as storytellers. Are we just creating distractions and diversions that turn people away from thinking about the story? Do they actually provoke us? Do they strike chords within us? Whether it's comedy, whether it's a scary movie, whether it's an action film, all of them can be used for those things. I've heard a lot of people come out of a movie or read a book and say, that really moved me. But the question is, where did it move them to? A lot of people say that, but they haven't philosophically or spiritually changed their address. We need to be able to stoke those fires of provocation that a story can do as it strums our heartstrings, as it pulls on our emotional chords. We want to see how those stories inform us about the one true story, and then have conversations that lead others toward that. So that when we say a film moved us, it actually did. It moved us from one location to another. I'll be fleshing out these ideas and more in my upcoming book, Cinemagogue, Reclaiming Entertainment and Navigating Narrative for the Myths and Metaphor It Was Meant to Be. But until next time, I'm James Harleman, and remember, watch to glorify.